with the EMA, and we move to the next one. The next one is the exchange of views with the Commission on the issue of exports of pesticides that have been banned in the EU and the setting of maximum residue limits for pesticides banned in the EU. It's another kind of hot topic for farmers and consumers, and coordinators agreed on the request of the Greens to have this discussion with the Commission today, of course related to various files that are ongoing. I will now give the floor to Klaus Behrendt, as usual on these topics, from the Commission, and then Mr. Helbig. So the floor is yours. I guess you start, Mr. Behrendt, and then to your colleague.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Actually, the order in the agenda is the inverse, so it would be better if Mr. Helbig starts first.
Okay, good. It was not on my list. Sorry for that. I take the opportunity before I give the floor back to Mr. Helbig to open formally the Catch the Eye, and also to say that I will hand over the chairmanship for the remaining part of the session to Vice President Bas Aykut in a couple of minutes. So, Mr. Helbig, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, dear colleagues. My name is Jürgen Helbig, and I'm dealing with the international chemicals files in Unit B2 of DG Environment. And I would like to give a very brief overview on the way how chemicals that are banned or severely restricted in the European Union are exported to non-EU countries. And this export is done under the rules of the Rotterdam Convention, on the prior informed consent procedure for certain hazardous chemicals and pesticides in international trade. The next slide, please. The Rotterdam Convention has the main objectives to promote shared responsibility in the international trade of certain hazardous chemicals. And this is done in order to protect human health and the environment, and to contribute to their environmentally sound use. The next slide, please. The main objective of the Rotterdam Convention is to share information on the chemicals and to regulate their exports. And the basic functioning of the convention is that chemicals are listed in Annex 3 to the convention, based on notifications of so-called final regulatory actions that are submitted by parties. Then parties are requested to submit their import response once a chemical has been listed in Annex 3, and this import response tells all the other parties whether the export of a chemical to that party is accepted or not. And those import responses are made available to all parties, and they apply to all parties. And then, based on that import response, exporting parties are required to respect the decision taken by a certain party and to not export a certain chemical if the importing party says no consent to the export. And in addition, there is another mechanism, and this mechanism is the export notification. All parties are required to notify the export of chemicals that are banned in their territory to importing parties. And this is mainly to inform the importing parties about exports taking place, but also to provide information on the properties of those chemicals in order to enable the importing parties to take appropriate action. The next slide, please. Implementation of the Rotterdam Convention in the Union is done by the so-called PIC regulation. PIC stands for Prior Informed Consent. And the PIC regulation implements the Rotterdam Convention in the Union, but it has even more restrictive rules on the export than the Convention. Next slide, please. The PIC regulation covers those chemicals that are banned or severely restricted for use and placing on the market in the European Union. And currently, about 226 chemicals are listed in Annex 1 to the PIC regulation. The convention chemicals are also listed in the PIC regulation, but the convention has currently only 52 chemicals that are listed in its Annex 3. So the PIC regulation covers a lot more chemicals. And the list of chemicals in the PIC regulation is updated regularly based on developments in union law, but also based on any further listings under the convention. The next slide, please. As I already said, the EU restricts more than the convention, and this is done, for example, by establishing so-called subcategories of convention use categories. The convention has two use categories, pesticides and industrial chemicals, and the convention acts based on bans or severe restrictions in the use categories. The European Union established subcategories with the objective to cover more chemicals than would be covered by the convention use categories. So we have about 226 that are currently banned or severely restricted in a subcategory of a convention use category, and those have to be then exported in accordance with the rule of the regulation. In addition, the PIC regulation regulates the export to all countries, irrespective of whether they are a party to the convention and also irrespective of their use. And then, in addition to the export notification procedure, we also have an explicit consent procedure established by the PIC regulation. And currently, about 120 chemicals are subject to that explicit consent procedure, which is going beyond the prior informed consent procedure under the convention, because this explicit consent procedure is established by approaching each individual importing country and asking whether the importing country accepts the export of a certain chemical to their territory. And this is done for all chemicals that qualify for this mechanism, but it's also done for all chemicals that are listed in the annex to the Rotterdam Convention and for which no import decision from the importing country has been provided. So this shows that the export of chemicals that are banned or severely restricted is only done when respecting certain rules, and those rules establish that information has to be provided to the importing country, but the rules go further and they may even not allow an export if the conditions of the regulation are not met. Next slide, please. Thank you very much for your attention.
Mr. Eckhout? Yeah.
Yes, I had to wait until my microphone was opened. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for that introductory presentation. We now move to Mr. Klaus Behrendt. As Pascal already said, we know you very well from DG Sante on these topics, so you are here to give the second presentation on behalf of the Commission, and then we will open up the floor for members to ask their questions. But first you, Mr. Klaus Behrendt.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to everybody. I have not prepared slides as Mr. Helwig has done, but will just speak about the import tolerances that are set for food placed on the EU market. And for that, let me first emphasize that the basic rule is that food placed on the market in the EU must be safe for consumers. And for this reason, the specific maximum residue levels are set, and they apply equally to food that is produced domestically in the EU and for food that is imported. Now, the MRL regulation, as adopted by the Parliament and the Council, provides for the possibility for setting of so-called import tolerances. And these are MRLs that are based on the use of a given pesticide outside of the EU. And this may also concern active substances that are no longer approved in the EU. Let me remind us why are imported tolerances necessary. They may be needed, for example, because the producers in third countries face different production conditions and pest pressures that are different from the ones in the EU, thinking, for example, about tropical regions. And therefore, the uses of a given substance may be different in a third country compared to the uses in the EU, if the substance is still also approved for uses in the EU. And then, most importantly, however, import tolerances are also necessary for crops that are actually not grown in the EU and that are still necessary to satisfy consumer demand. Among the examples are, for example, the exotic fruits or coffee that all of us enjoy, or almost all of us enjoy every day. There is no domestic production, and therefore it is necessary and rightly foreseen in the regulation that for such cases it is possible to establish import tolerances for the production of these crops in third countries. It is also very important to note that the assessment of applications for import tolerances are done with the same rigor and based on the same data requirements as for uses within the EU. So if an applicant would like to get an import tolerance for a substance that is no longer approved in the EU, they have to provide a full data package that demonstrates safety. And where the consumer safety is not demonstrated, the import tolerances are not granted. And we have, in recent years, actually lowered the MRLs for a number of substances that are no longer approved in the EU due to the limit, down to the limit of quantification, which is the technical zero, because of concerns for consumer safety. And among the substances that are probably known to the members of the parliament are dimethioate, chlorothalonil, chlorpyrifos and chlorpyrifos methyl, propiconazole, and iprodione, to name but a few. Here, the review in the EU found unacceptable risks or open questions as regards the safety of consumers, and therefore all MRLs are lowered, and no import tolerances have been granted for these. So that's the established policy already. When consumer safety is not demonstrated, import tolerances are not granted. As a new policy in the Farm to Fork strategy, the Commission has committed to pursue an ambitious level of protection for that not only looks at human health, but also at environmental problems, and to make sure that environmental problems are not simply shifted from the EU to third countries. And therefore, in the Farm to Fork strategy, we have announced that we will take into account environmental aspects when deciding upon requests for import tolerances for substances that are no longer approved in the EU, while, and I would really like to underline that, while respecting WTO standards and our international obligations. This new policy is currently under development. However, in order to respect our international obligations, we have to be mindful that we cannot, in a blanket way, refuse any import tolerance request for substances no longer approved in the EU. We need to focus, and we believe that it is, in the beginning in particular, important to focus on environmental matters that are of global concern, that go beyond national boundaries, and that cannot be addressed by action in the EU alone. And as an example for such an environmental concern, I would like to mention the worldwide decline of pollinators or the contamination of the environment with bioaccumulative, toxic and persistent chemicals. So more concretely, for the initial actions in this new policy, we believe that we should start with the neonicotinoid substances, clothianidin and thiamethoxam. They are known to be significant, but not the only, of course, factors in the decline of bee populations worldwide. So we plan to lower all the existing MRLs for these substances in a first step to the limit of quantification and no longer grant import tolerances if applications are submitted. Other neonicotinoid substances and other substances that are persistent, bioaccumulating and toxic may of course follow in the future. In order to prepare this new policy, we have started a number of outreach activities with third countries, to inform them, but also to inform about the support that can be provided for them to move away from the use of these substances in their own productions. And that is the focus of our work at the moment. In fact, you're all aware that already today many third countries are very critical of the strict policy that the EU implements with regard to maximum residue levels and import tolerances, even when only considering human health factors. So it is very important that we prepare this new policy and that we inform the third countries about it. We have organized a number of events in this regard. A bigger event for bigger groups of third countries, but also information in the WTO SPS committee and also in a number of bilateral meetings with third countries. And we inform them about knowledge sharing or not available knowledge that can be helpful for them and technical advice and assistance and training in order to move to more sustainable plant protection. And as a last element, I would also like to mention that we, of course, are very active in the Codex Alimentarius committee related to pesticides residues. We push to accelerate the periodic reviews of older, less favorable substances for which there are still Codex limits existing, to which many third countries refer and on which they rely. Indeed, many third countries are actually keen in preserving such Codex limits as long as possible in order to be able to rely on them for their own production, but also for exports. So one step that will be necessary is also to accelerate the process in the Codex system to review older substances. So all in all, it is not just about refusing import tolerances that will help to achieve a more sustainable food production in third countries. We also have to work and have the intention to work with third countries to move their production system away from using harmful substances that are also detrimental to their environment, but in particular, indeed, contribute to global environmental problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those two introductions. I now open up the floor for the members, and since this topic was put on the agenda on behalf of the Greens, I will first give the floor to Michel Rivasi on behalf of the Greens, and then I will take the other members. So first, Michel Rivasi, you have the floor.
Merci.
Thank you very much indeed, Bas. Thanks for the floor. Thank you also to the Commission. Thank you to DG Santé. I asked this question because when I read the Farm to Fork strategy, which wants 50% reduction in pesticide use and 25% arable land that has to be targeted for organic farming, well, when I see 80,000 tons of pesticides which are very hazardous and they're exported to developing countries, and these large pesticide producers, FMC, Cote d'Ivoire, all the different ones, they are still making billions of dollars in profit selling these hazardous products. And we're talking about around a third of what they sell globally. You know, given we have certain values in the EU and we have the Green Deal, I don't think all this adds up. I've had the Commission's answer, but 23rd of March this year, still today, you haven't explained what the different options are. And now we need to get down to brass tacks. So, do you think you will be changing the PIC regulation? Especially given what we've just heard from Mr. Helbig. This is the PIC regulation 649, which looks at the imports and exports of certain hazardous chemicals and allows certain companies to export these substances to non-EU companies. How do you think you'll be amending that? Will you be amending Annex 5? Will you be amending other legislative texts? Biocide regulation, the REACH regulation. All of our rules have to apply to these companies when they work abroad, outside the EU. And then you talked about the MRLs. As you know, if we export things banned in the EU, things actually, it will come back in, find itself its own way back to our plates. So these MRLs, not just on the neonicotinoids, but on all banned pesticides, will you be putting forward a zero tolerance level for any foodstuffs coming into the EU? France, for example, this was opinion of the Constitutional Council. The recommendation was to ban production of pesticides banned in the EU so that they couldn't be exported. You know, if we say it's too hazardous for our health, but we allow companies to send all of this to countries in the developing world, and they have no way, those countries, of monitoring any of this, if we still allow these exports, that's just an aberration. So I hope, Commission, you will take specific harsh actions. There are 70 MEPs, 70 NGOs from 70 groups from different MEPs from different groups who are asking for this. So do something so that we are in compliance with the strategy as stated. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. And we now continue with the list for the EPP, Christine Schneider.
Ja, herzlichen Dank für die wirklich.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for that very important, interesting discussion. We've had to go into this in a bit of depth. The most important thing is that we're making sure that these substances aren't going to be consumed here in the EU. And we talk about these import tolerances. You know, there are differing levels of monitoring in food monitoring outside the EU. And therefore, I think it's going to be difficult to look at phytosanitary measures that are used in other countries, countries that don't have possibility of sending food into the EU anymore. You know, we're talking about competition here vis-a-vis food production in and outside the EU. You know, if we look at bringing in hazardous chemicals, hazardous to apiarists, then, you know, we need to be looking at measures. Our objective must be that in these third countries that we have proper agricultural practices and that we need, you know, help from the Commission to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For Renew, we have Martin Hoschek.
Mr. Hoschek, can you please activate your camera? Thank you.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, but we cannot see you. At the top of the screen, there's a
Hello?
camera icon. Can you please activate
Okay.
it?
No.
I propose we're going to check the technicalities with Martin Hojsik, and meanwhile we just move on to the next speaker and we will come back to you, Martin. So first from ID, Joël Melin.
Oui, merci beaucoup, monsieur.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank you both for your presentations. What I would say is that sometimes we're addressing the consequences more than the causes, and we need to address the causes. If products are coming in from third countries, then we should be considering that. We should not be importing things which are advised against or banned here. Mr. Brent, you talked about a number of different products, and you said that we had a certain tolerance threshold if they were not produced in Europe. What I'd say to that is that we've heard about problems with linseed from Australia, potatoes from Canada, which we were advised against, and I think there were other items too. There was an objection to leguminous seeds from the US. So these things are all coming into the European Union, although we're advised that they're problematic. Some of the European member states, France in particular, have overseas territory, and we're concerned about the environmental impact of that. We're obviously a maritime state, and our overseas territories can produce coffee, pineapples, bananas, and all kinds of things, which we don't necessarily have to then import from third countries. So to some extent, we could be cooperating with third countries in the way that Ms. Rivasi has suggested. But we should also, I would say, be having a fresh look at all our trading patterns. We should be looking at our food sources, at our agricultural practices, to see whether we could revise some of the clauses which we have to enhance our food security for French and European citizens. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we try once more. Martin Hojsik.
Okay, let's hope the second attempt is going to work. Thank you very much, Bas. Happy to hear that it's working. So thank you for all the information. Now, I think that the important question for me is to the Commission is that under the chemical strategy, the Commission has committed to lead by example. And in line with international commitments, and ultimately we need to ensure that hazardous chemicals banned in the European Union are not produced for export, including by amending the relevant legislation. Now, could the Commission clarify its intention on this when it plans to amend the PIC regulation, because the current annex is, in my view, very limited? And is the Commission considering to amend other regulations, such as REACH, the plant protection products, or biocide products? Because I think these are also very relevant for the production of banned pesticides for export, because we say we don't want it to be used in Europe. We complain when it's coming to Europe from abroad, but sadly also we are complicit in having these substances produced in Europe, exported with us profiting and doing the harm in other countries, which is essentially coming back through imported products. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We now move to ECR, to Alexander Vondra.
Yes, thank you, Bas. I think not surprisingly, we in the ECR do not share neither the activist nor the protectionist attitude towards this. So we believe that this exchange has been organized in response to a study published by Public Eye and the British branch of the Greenpeace. And it means that its authors have a clear political agenda against the use of pesticides. And I would say I question its impartiality, therefore. The compliant pesticides made in the EU are actually are acutely needed in the third countries that have their own regulatory system ensuring the safe use of approved products. Contrary to this report, the context in which these pesticides are traded does not resemble the Wild West. Because of differing agronomic condition and needs, these pesticides are used across the globe to protect crops from highly damaging diseases, weeds, and pests, many of which do not exist within the EU. EU-made pesticides are essential farming tools for many third countries in the management of destructive pests, tools that improve self-sufficiency in food production and food security. In our judgment, the EU has an assessment process that blocks harmful substances from entering the market. For example, wine could not be authorized for use as it contains ethanol, a well-known carcinogen. The same could be also said about vitamins needed to keep our bodies fit and healthy, some of which are suspected of having hazardous properties, such as vitamin K5 found in the green leafy vegetables. So let me conclude with a question. Is it only a matter of time before this committee goes after these sample groceries too? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we now turn to the left, Anja Hazekamp.
Dank u wel, voorzitter. Wanneer we weten dat...
Thank you very much. Well, when we know that pesticides are so dangerous to people, to farmers, to the environment, to animals, that we ban them, then why would we allow them elsewhere? But Bayer and many other companies continuing to sell these self-same pesticides to developing countries. There are many, many cases of poisoning. There have been deaths from such poisons in many countries. There are many examples of them. This has an impact there, but it also has an impact on us through our foodstuffs, which are imported. Of course, our farmers are complying with the rules and they're having to compete with unfair competition produced by farmers who are not complying with the rules. So I'm glad that the Commission has decided to stop being quite so hypocritical. Having said that, there's still a huge lack of clarity about what the intention actually is. I found some of the Commission statements a bit vague, so I have a lot of questions. When are you actually going to introduce the ban? For example, the ban on exports, that is. When are we actually going to see lower import thresholds going down to zero? And can the Commission actually give some guarantees that the residues from these various pesticides will actually be checked and that they will have proper detection procedures applied to imports as well? I'd also like to know about the MRL regulation and whether there's any intention to amend that. So I am quite concerned about these double standards with pesticides, and I wonder whether double standards is going to continue across the board. And for example, for eggs which are produced in battery farms, because it's only if we ban all these things which are completely unsustainable and potentially dangerous that we can become proper leaders in the farm sector.
Continue the list for the Greens, Sarah Mathieu.
Thank you, Chair. The Commission, in its reply to a letter of more than 70 MEPs, says that import tolerances ensure the health of European consumers is protected. But actually, member states' official food residue monitoring program shows that in 2018, 74 different pesticides that are banned from use in the EU were still detected on our markets. And moreover, the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and Hazardous Substances and Waste found grave violations of human rights associated with the use of pesticides. Clearly, we are not protecting consumers in the EU nor outside of the EU against pesticides. In its Farm to Fork strategy, the Commission confirmed its commitment to promote a global transition to sustainable food systems, not only within its borders but also outside. So in the light of this objective, the EU can no longer turn a blind eye to the export and import of pesticides. And indeed, as Mr. Behrendt said, not just because of health but also for environmental reasons. Now, the Commission acknowledges this. It has clearly stated that it will use its diplomacy, trade and development policy to address it. So I'd like to know, what has the Commission done concretely so far? Will it set a zero tolerance level for residues of all hazardous pesticides in EU food? Which next steps will it take? And secondly, the Mercosur agreement intends to reduce tariffs for pesticides-dependent crops and on chemicals used in pesticides productions. So chemicals banned for use in the EU can also still be exported to Mercosur countries. So what will the Commission do there to resolve this inconsistency between environmental and trade policy?
Thank you very much. As far as I know, in the room over there, Mick Wallace also would like to ask a question. Mick, you have the floor over there.
Thanks very much, Bas, and thanks to the Commission for the presentation. You said that import tolerance is not permitted if safety concerns are not met. But you're also saying that that with the Farm to Fork now, we can't just think of human health, but environmental matters of a global concern, and we need to consider the worldwide decline of pollinators. Can you tell me how many pesticides that which are banned in the EU and which are legally exported to third countries, how many of them actually do reduce or contribute, I should say, to the decline of pollinators? And also, I mean, you're saying that you're providing support for farmers to move away from pesticide use in third countries. Have you considered doing that in Europe? I can tell you the latest CAP is doing nothing for helping, especially the small farmers in Ireland and other countries in Europe, to move away from using the pesticides, given that we're still giving 80% of the money to the 20% richest farmers. Do you think that maybe we should coordinate the policy? And my last point, I mean, under what argument can we continue to allow companies to contribute to the global decline of pollinators and also the health of people in the global south? We seem overly concerned about, if we allow this to go abroad, it might come back in our food, which of course it is. But should we not also be concerned about the people living in these third countries and the impact that it has on their health? And the nutshell of it all surely is that aren't we facilitating profit before public health? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We go to the last two speakers for S&D, Eric Andrieu.
Monsieur Andrieu, vous pouvez pousser votre bouton speak, s'il vous plaît. Monsieur Andrieu.
Voilà, ça marche.
Oui, monsieur,
Merci
vous pouvez
beaucoup.
parler?
Oui, merci. Vous m'entendez? Oui, merci.
Yes, thank you very much, Bas. We obviously export products which we don't want here, and therefore we are taking advantage of the fact that legislation in other third countries allows use of products that we don't allow here. This is actually quite wrong. This is what I've understood. Many of these toxic pesticides end up on our plates anyway through some of the products that we import. Is this really meant to be part of our chemicals and pesticides strategy in the European Union? The Commission is supposed to be addressing these issues, and therefore I'd like to know how it's going to go about it. I have some specific questions. Are you going to adapt or modify the peak regulation on dangerous substances? If so, how and when? And equally, are you going to modify the REACH directive, and are you going to modify and put forward amendments to the legislation on pesticides?
And last but not least, Jutta Paulus.
Yes, thank you very much. A lot of things have already been addressed by my colleagues. Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much, Mr. Behrendt, for your very peculiar insights on the role of the EU when it comes to fighting global threats such as loss of pollinators. You said that we cannot stop this alone within the EU, and I truly agree. So I think it's all the more peculiar that pesticides, which have long banned in the EU for their environmental impact, still continue to be exported. And secondly, I would like to know how it can be that if a pesticide is banned for its impact for health, that we still have MRLs on food for these pesticides, because as you very well know, it is possible to grow coffee without using toxic pesticides. I could send you a package of my ecologically grown coffee if you don't believe me. So therefore, I would like to know, has this possibility ever been taken into account in your assessment of granting MRL levels for imported food? I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and apologies that we're running slightly late, so I would ask the Commission to be concise in their answers, and to be very honest, I think a lot of the questions were also really to be more clear on some legislative action, what we can expect from the Commission. So there are a couple of factual questions, and there are of course questions on the follow-up that we can expect from the Commission. So I would prefer to hear clear answers on that. I will give both speakers 3 minutes, both, and we start this time with Mr. Klaus Behrendt, and then we turn to Mr. Jürgen Helbig. But first, Klaus Behrendt, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, in 3 minutes, I'm afraid I cannot answer to all the points. So I'll concentrate on a few. First, Mr. Melin mentioned that some of the crops I mentioned are grown in the EU. And that is true. I mean, linseed is also grown in the EU, but the production is not sufficient to satisfy demand. So we depend on imports for them. And with all due respect, all the territories of France, the dom-toms, will not suffice to produce all the exotic fruit and all the coffee that the EU consumers need. So there is an objective need for further imports of these crops. Madame Rivasi asked whether we will amend the MRL regulation. That is not necessary in our view. We can apply this new policy to also take into account environmental effects by making use of the provisions of the current regulation, in particular the other legitimate factors mentioned in Article 14 for the decision making. Ms. Schneider wanted to know what we do to support producers in third countries. This is happening via the programs and activities of the DG International Partnerships, both bilateral development cooperation, but also larger projects such as one that is called COLE RCP, which is particularly helping producers in third countries to phase out old pesticides and replace them with newer ones. Mr. Wallace wanted to know, do we also provide support to domestic producers? And the answer is, of course, yes. This is primarily happening in the member states via the advisory services, and is supposed to be done via the advisory services. And you're right, Mr. Wallace, in pointing out that the CAP and the financing of advisory services in the context of the CAP are quite important in this regard. We also finance research activities to develop new and more environmentally friendly and more sustainable plant protection methods to considerable amounts in the research framework programs. The question for Madame Mathieu, the Mercosur and other free trade agreements do not impact at all safety standards. So any food being imported in the context of trade agreements still has to respect all our rules and obligations. The vast majority of the commodities placed on the market in the EU respect the MRLs that are in place. I mean, this comes out every year out of the report from EFSA on the coordinated monitoring programs that are conducted throughout the EU. Maybe the last point to Madame Paulus, to Ms. Paulus, yes, of course, we know that it is possible to grow coffee organically, like many or practically all other crops can be grown organically. And that is one of the intentions, of course, to increase the production under organic rules. And the regulation on organic production also has specific rules for imports of organic coffee and other crops from third countries. But overall demand at the moment can clearly not be satisfied by organic production alone. It's one of the targets of the Farm to Fork strategy to make that change over time and increase the share in organic production, but we are at the moment not there yet. So import tolerances remain necessary, including for substances that are no longer approved in the EU, but as said very clearly, and I want to emphasize it again, only when this is safe for consumers, and in the future we will more and more take into account also environmental considerations when taking decisions on import tolerances. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Jürgen Helbig from DG ENV.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much for all the comments provided. Well, I think for my area, the main question or comment was what does the Commission intend to do on the export of chemicals that are banned or severely restricted in the Union. And I should have mentioned that in the chemical strategy for sustainability, we in fact commit to acting on the export of banned or severely restricted chemicals. And we are currently analyzing which options do exist when looking at our regulatory framework, and then we will take a decision on in which area we will then prepare a proposal on how to address this commitment to act on the export of those chemicals, including certainly the pesticides. So the Commission will come up with a proposal in the coming years, and then also providing some more information on what we do in addition. And in fact, we support in particular developing countries in their efforts to improve the chemicals management at international level. So this is done through technical assistance provided in the context of the Rotterdam Convention, where we provide funds to the Secretariat and to enable the Secretariat to work with third countries to improve the implementation of the Rotterdam Convention. But we also provide a lot of assistance through a so-called special program. The special program is in fact on capacity building in third countries to improve chemicals management in general. This certainly includes pesticides, and we provided about 20 million euros in the past 7 years to the special program, which is now used in specific projects to increase the capacity of developing countries in the area of chemicals and waste management. And since we think that this is certainly very important, so that then they can take their own decisions on which chemicals they allow to be used in their territory, and this is more effective than acting here from our side. But we will pursue both angles in order to improve the situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I think this exchange